Okay, I think we are live, everybody. Welcome to I guess I'll call it like the closing event of North by Northwest Women's Work. We've got 10 of the fabulous artists here who we're going to talk to about their work and in the show. And we're so excited to have this Matterport software that we can digitally walk through everything and talk about it. So welcome everyone. I'll just sort of do like a really quick intro of who we've got with us today. We have got Molly Haig. We have Heather Schroeder. We have Leslie Van Stavern Millar II. We have Maggie Rositny Hiltner. We've got Eileen Denny. We've got Diana Tremaine. We've got Veronica Chechi. We have Stephanie Frostad. We have Blair Truer. And we have Julie Nocent Vigil. So welcome everyone. So excited to have y'all here tonight. So the first artist we're going to talk to is Molly Haig, because she is currently in Edinburgh and did not want to stay up till well past 2 in the morning to do this. So hello, Molly. I'm going to switch so we can start watching your video here in a moment. Here we go. So Molly, I think one of the biggest questions a lot of people have had is just, how did you do this?
That's a good question. It took a lot of planning, and I was kind of thinking of it actually as choreography. I have a dance background, so I was thinking about like really precise plans for where my hands needed to go so that everything got revealed at the right time. So for context, this is a video of a Little called Pauline, which is an excerpt from Tender Buttons, a poetry book from 1914 by Gertrude Stein. And the language itself is really cool and doesn't follow a lot of the normal conventions that we expect words and grammar to follow. So that made it really exciting to work with and make something out of. And the idea is that each line of the poem is revealed in the correct order. And so if you were reading this animation out loud, you would get the whole poem. But this is where the like really precise choreography and planning came in, because the repetitions need to line up with each other in the right way.
And then the other thing I love about this is the sound. It's very soothing, and then just the slight like paper ripping and cutting in the background, and then the birds. And was the sound something that you definitely took into, consideration when you were making this?
Yeah, I feel really inspired by like finding old paper and newspapers and things in the attic or the basement. And so I wanted to replicate that feeling of discovery and like rustling and sort of recreate those textures and patterns and sounds.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And I know there was a connection to Gertrude Stein in this. So what was that? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the way she uses language. Particularly, I think it's interesting that sometimes the words are connected based on sound instead of meaning, or because they sound sort of adjacent to something that means something, but they don't quite mean the thing. So I find her work to be really rich to like listen to or read through, and then also to kind of dig through for meaning. And for this project, I really like parsed the language and looked for kinds of repetitions that would show language that had something in common. And through doing that, I started to find language that was related to typography and printing. And so I started to understand this poem as kind of a version of the news, kind of a critique of the news, because there was also language that sounded sensationalistic or over the top or unreliable.
Mm-hmm. That's really relevant in today's current atmosphere.
Yes, I thought so too.
Yeah. So talk to me about the theme of women's work and sort of what inspired you to apply for this show and the theme of women's work and kind of what that means to you.
I'm like so honored and excited to be part of this show. I think this is such an important thing to be celebrating. And I guess as a woman, this is my work. I'm a graphic designer. This is using what I was learning, and it's also looking back in time to find the work of another woman that I found really special. So it's like double whammy woman's work. And it's really rewarding to like look back in time and find a woman making something that you admire. It's
Right.
special.
There's layers of meaning, just like there's layers in your work.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wonderful. Well, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Sure. I guess my hope with this piece is that I feel like Gertrude Stein's language isn't necessarily always inviting and accessible, but I want it to be sort of an invitation for the viewer to feel like it's theirs and feel like it's their opportunity to examine language in a way that they might not have before. And I think that also fits with the theme that I saw in the poem of like sort of calling us to look more closely at the media and what we're absorbing and the kinds of language that we're surrounded by.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Molly, and thank you for staying up.
Thanks for having me.
Can I say something? I've been aware of Gertrude Stein for 40 or 50 years, and I find it really dense and difficult to stay with it for very long. But I feel like this is the most successful presentation of this work, not the book that she wrote about being in Paris with her arty friends. That's just like, the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas is one of my favorite books in the world, but this is really successful. So I applaud you bringing it to life.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. Share our screen again. Here we are back in the gallery. So we can see Molly's work is right here at the beginning on this kind of old-fashioned looking TV, which I love. So we'll go ahead and head on into the gallery. This is Courtney Blazen's work. And then up top here, which I love, is Make American Great Again, which I think wins award for best title in the show, in my opinion. And Diane Bush, the artist, wanted to be here tonight, but she actually has an opening of the full Merkin show in Las Vegas, which I'm like, okay, if you can't make it, I guess that's a good reason. So yes, just wanted to give her a little shout out for her amazing work in the show. And so I think the next person we're going to visit is Heather Schroeder and her lovely work here right next to the Merkin. So, hi Heather, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. So, kind of tell me about your piece here.
Yeah, so this is part of an ongoing series that I've been working on where I've been talking to women who have been impacted by domestic violence. And I'm listening to their stories and I'm embroidering their injuries that they acquired while in those relationships. And that's sort of the gist of what the content is, but it kind of all started because someone I love who is very close to me ended up in a very violent relationship that they were in for a long time. And it was my way of finding a way to process what I was witnessing with them and also sort of shining a light and letting them know this is what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And I know, especially in your artist statement, it's very dark material, but you wanted to emphasize the little bits of joy.
Yeah, I think it's really important to see that for my family growing up, there was a lot of abuse, but there was also happiness that happened. And I think that happiness comes from healing as well. And that's sort of what I hope to get at with the series, is that there is light and there is a road to healing through surviving abuse.
Mm-hmm. And sort of talk to me about the presentation. Why did you choose this sort of like the little clips and just hanging on the wall and the very raw presentation?
Yeah, I have tried different ways of presenting the embroideries, and I felt this was most successful because domestic violence isn't clean and it's not easy. And I think having the rough edges, having the hoop line where you can still see where the hoop is, that there's spots that are always left over even after you heal. And it's dirty. And I think that hanging it with the clips is very delicate though. So I think it kind of points out that it's heavy, but also a very fragile topic at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And I know everyone who sees this piece always talks about the hoop line.
Oh yeah.
Something about it. It's just, you know, like you said, it's kind of like a scar. It's kind of
Yes.
like healing over, and that idea of healing. So talk to me about your concept of women's work and what made you apply for this show.
Yeah, so I was super excited to apply to this show. I just think being surrounded by other women artists is a huge honor who are so talented, and being able to talk about a topic that a lot of women are impacted by. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and I think this is a great time to talk about what's going on, but it's very relevant to women and women's work. And I think textiles is often seen as women's work as well.
I think a lot of people in the show would agree with you.
Yes.
All right. Anything else you want to add, Heather?
Just thank you so much. And like I said, it was a great honor to be part of this show.
And it was a great honor to have you in the show. This work is
Thank you.
beautiful and delicate. And like I said, I've heard amazing comments about this work specifically. So
Thank you.
Well done, Heather. All right. So if we turn the corner here, we'll start to venture into the spooky corner, as Maggie calls it. And yeah, we'll start with you, Maggie. Hi.
It is the spooky corner. Look at it. It's great.
It's a good corner. Oh, let me zoom out here. All right. So Maggie, tell us about your work.
You know, I pulled up kind of the best way out so I don't get too, you know me well, I can get very off topic. So I pulled up what I wrote from my artist statement. So I'll go ahead and read that. It just seems to keep me on there. And it answers all these questions. So I tasked myself with questioning the artifacts of my culture by changing their context and content. Working with handmade remnants of the past, I repurposed them to comment on the present. So the history of a quilt pattern, this one, Grandmother's Flower Garden, as well as its geometric pattern, is contrasted with the wild color and billowing abundance of found embroidery and the solemn beauty of the skeleton and linen. I've been making work about mortality for many years, but the eminence of death and disease, by disease and violence this year has changed the context of this work. Working in found materials, I employ a multitude of anonymous assistants. I try to celebrate and elevate their abandoned handwork. I overdyed a stained and tattered quilt to give it a new life, a garden at night. The work is hand-stitched and the line between my stitching and the found stitchery is blurred. So I brought to hold up, I know it's not a great format, but this is what the quilt looked like before I got to it.
Wow.
It was very super happy, kind of, these colors aren't really popular, so that's why nobody wanted this incredible piece of handwork. So I find these quilts and this embroidery in junk shops, and usually it's kind of stained and tattered, and I try to change it and bring what I see as traditional women's work. I feel like it's just kind of a sneaking it into the museum, you know? So.
And then, yeah, talk about, I know especially with your skeletons, a lot of your work talks about mortality, which is an interesting concept to pair with a maybe something like a quilt that's supposed to give you comfort and, you know, and then pairing that with the idea of mortality and death. And I know a lot of environmental factors factor into your work as well. So kind of talk about what's that juxtaposition like?
Right. I think textiles are a really good format. It's like sort of a tickle, tickle, slap kind of thing. Like everything looks really pretty and comfortable from far away, and then you get up close and there's plenty of room to talk about serious things. So, you know, I'm trying not to make my work a polemic. It's more of like hinting and leading you along to think about the things I want to think about. But yeah, I really think this format of a comfortable, safe medium is a good place. It's kind of like comedy, you know, you can couch the serious stuff in between the comfortable, fun stuff. And yep.
There it is.
That's my MO.
So talk to me. I know the idea of women's work is very near and dear to your heart. So yeah, talk to me about what that sort of means to you and why you applied for the show, and talk about that.
Sure. So the process, I really looked forward to the biennial, you know, to the Yam Biennial, and I was kind of surprised when it was women's work. And then I kind of realized that I was seeing that in museums all across the country, that 2020 was the year of the woman, which I want a new year. I want another year. We need a do-over. We don't deserve 2020.
Yeah, we deserve a better year.
We deserve a better year than 2020 because, you know, so many shows got closed and stuff, and because of coronavirus. So of course I was going to enter, and then it was just such an incredible show. And I was thrilled to see so much textile work and so much process-based work, you know, hand work, which I'm really drawn to, and so many women in the show. Gosh, it's pretty wonderful. So.
Yeah, well, we're thrilled to have you in the show. And then congratulations, you are a Juror Award winner, which is super exciting. But I was telling the artist earlier, our juror had like 4 selections. She said it was basically impossible to choose someone. So I think that just speaks to the caliber of the work in this show as well. So thank you, Maggie.
You're welcome.
All right. Now, continuing on in the spooky corner. Hi, Leslie. Which your work has this lovely reflection of the Matterport in it. So, but tell us about, you know, I know you and I have talked about this series specifically, but sort of give us a brief outline of this series and kind of where it ended up.
Okay, yeah, so this is a gouache painting on rag paper, and it's part of a series I started in 2013 called Burnt Offerings, and which was inspired by a forest fire that took place pretty close to where I live here in Arlee, Montana. I'm 7 years old, and so having done art for my entire life, basically, I'm starting to go back to a lot of the things that inspired me all the way along, and especially fairy tales and kind of mythical images. And the fact that I basically grew up in a matriarchy, and I was part of the women's movement in the late 60s, early 70s. And so, you know, there's a lot of factors, but in any case, this fire triggered this series that I've worked on off and on for 7 years. I've rarely shown the work because I've been trying to kind of hold on to it till I could exhibit it as a group that interacted with each other. And, you know, the pandemic has changed everything, because this was the year I was going to talk about circulating it through the museums and galleries, especially in the Northwest. So when I realized that I could submit it to the show, which seemed really appropriate, and thank you to Stephanie Frostad and my friend Chrissy Hager for both urging me to enter the piece. They knew about my work, and they were kind enough to get me out of my daze about the coronavirus and apply. But in any case, so I've been painting with gouache for a long time. I lived in Iran as a child and was very, very inspired by the Persian miniature art that I saw in the bazaar and that my mom bought and brought into the house. And that painting is very flat. It's highly detailed. It's usually narrative. There's like all these attributes that I have, you know, pretty much been teaching myself and developing since I was in my early 20s. So this painting is uncharacteristically large. Usually, most of the work I've done is pretty small, you know, like 8 by 12 or 6 by 9 or whatever. And I made a decision 2.5 years ago that I really wanted to do a big painting to bring a lot of these elements in. And this particular painting was the first of the large paintings I've done. And it was triggered specifically by seeing some artwork in one of the national museums in DC that was having to do with Iran, which is where I'd lived as a kid. And this image of the tree of life, which had this very unusual kind of a spiral twisted trunk at a time when I was getting ready to do a painting that was larger. So anyway, it inspired this. And then there's more detail about this if you listen to the interview that Amanda did with me. But my mom got ill, and at the time I was working on the painting, and I ended up really being affected by that experience. She survived a very disturbing incident, but the woman floating above this tree of life was inspired by my experience with her, because the painting is really talking about like the cultural tradition. So you've got, I don't think you can see it well, but there's a grandmother in the foreground interacting with her granddaughter. And then the daughter of this trio is floating above the tree of life. And they're in a landscape that implies aridity or desiccation, which it's all tied up with what's going on right now with what I consider the death of the patriarchy. But like depletion and ending and sparsity into this kind of opulent life form. And the woman is at the apex, kind of holding a balance for the family, whereas the grandmother and the granddaughter are exchanging on a cultural level, like the traditions. So that might be more than you wanted to know, but it took a long time. It took 150 to 200 hours, and yeah, and it's now I'm on like the third painting in this larger group. So.
Well, this series, like I said, the interview we did really delves deep into that. So I think it's hard to talk about this piece briefly. There's just so much history behind it. Yeah. So, but yeah, do you want to talk to the theme of women's work and what that sort of means to you? And, you sort of already talked about what inspired you to apply, but.
Yeah, well, I'll just say this because it wasn't in our interview, but I went to Mount Holyoke College, a women's college, which is one of the Seven Sisters, and back in the late 60s was one of the few options for people that had a really, really, really strong academic interest and didn't want to be in a male environment. So the school, it's kind of funny, it was the first women's college in the country, and the woman that started it, whose name is Mary Lyon, her whole thing was women working. Women are talented. She built that school gathering pennies. I mean, so there's like this really strong work ethic of the graduates, even now, which is kind of interesting, like over 150 years later. So and my family is like workers. Everybody's doing something. We make things. We are part of the community. We volunteer. There's just like a whole level of interaction with the culture. So that's what this painting's kind of about, which is I think that women's work to a certain extent is holding the culture and recognizing beauty and nurturing the next generation. So it's like you said, it's pretty wound up, but I think I've also talked a little bit about it. So
yeah, I
like that theme, and I got really excited that the Yellowstone and other institutions across the country were using this 100th anniversary of the suffrage. We're going to I agree. I think we need a rain check.
Yes.
Because it's such a rich theme, and so many venues have had to drop plans or really scale back or whatever. And I completely applaud the fact that you guys have been creative in trying to get the word out and like this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Leslie. All right. Going into our room here, I think next we're going to talk to Eileen Denny about her beautiful piece on the wall here. Hello, Eileen.
Hello.
So I know this is another piece with a really rich history. And I know, I think at the opening we talked a little bit about it, but just sort of remind everyone about who this woman is and the history of this piece.
Okay, so the woman who's depicted in this piece right now is my great-great-grandmother, Kunigrund Tillinger. She actually survived, a genocide at the end of World War II that was issued by the then Tito's regime in Serbia. She is a Danube Swabian woman of it's a German ethnic group that was prevalent in the Eastern European region. It was called like the Banat in that area, but over about 170,000 people were either displaced or I guess victims of work camps in that area from 1944 to 1950. And she actually managed to survive. So the piece right here is kind of odd in a way, because it's not only a portrait, but it's also a narrative. So I'm kind of playing on that traditional triangle format of, that's very common and prevalent in the oldest of, women's portrait, of course, the Madonna.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have behind her another like cultural tradition that is fairly prevalent and mainly done by women is folk art, especially in that area, the flowers and the kinds of folk artsy theme,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
And then, talk about the figures inside these flowers. I'll kind of zoom in here, and what those are representing.
so the figures inside the flowers, that's generally the narrative part of the whole story. So if you go to on the screen on the left, we have both Kunigrund and her husband Peter. And then above in the other flower, we have her and her husband Peter kind of caught in the middle of the turmoil, during World War II. So we have the Nazi Germans on the left-hand side, and then the communist Serbian on the other side, both pointing guns at them. And then in the top flower, where all the skulls and skeletons, we actually have her in one of the work camps, kind of clutching her hair, kind of just like, ugh. And then the next flower with it's kind of spiked, we have her walking after she's released from that work camp. She walked all the way from Hungary to Austria to meet up with her children. And then in the bottom flower on the right, we kind of have her by herself in her elderly age.
Mm-hmm. And I think the story behind this piece is just fascinating. I just think that's so exciting that you've got that family history, and that's really informing your artwork. And I've heard a lot of people compare it to Candide Wiley, so well done. So sort of talk to the theme of women's work and what that sort of means to you, and what inspired you to apply to the show.
Well, women's work for me has always, been about, the things that women do that aren't very appreciated, especially, like in the art world, mainly folk art, it's like, and crafts and arts. I mean, what distinguishes that from high art? The only difference is it's made by a woman, honestly. Mm-hmm. So women's work, it's just the everyday things that we as women do that contribute to society as a whole. I mean, we do, like that has been said earlier, we shape culture. I mean, in the smallest of ways, whether it's through a family recipe, whether it's through, family stories, I mean, the whole reason I actually made this piece is because of the stories that my mother would tell me about Kunigrund and about the family back in Serbia and what happened there. I mean, it's just, you know, our legacy as women is passing down, you know, family stories and family history.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you, Eileen, so much for participating in the show. Your work is amazing, and it's just a beautiful addition to the show, and we really appreciate you being in it.
Thank you. I would love being here.
How big is the piece?
The piece, if I remember correctly, I think it's 44 by 24.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Oil on canvas.
Mhm.
Yeah, I literally only had a photo of Kunigrund the size of my thumb to work from.
Wow. That's impressive.
It's in black and white, so there's a lot of guesswork.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, we have Tenyo, and we have her beautiful sculpture here, Dragon. So Tenyo, talk to us about this work.
Yes, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Oh yeah, we can hear you good.
Okay. So I prepared my writing as well, and it is a portrait of a female samurai called Betsuki. And you've already, I think some of them, but you know, I'm sorry. A few years ago, I was working on a series of busts with an expression of resilience. And I wanted to make one that represents my country, Japan. While viewing through the internet, I came across archival photos of women in kimono and sword. Most of them were posted posed by actresses, but I found Betsuki actually existed, and I was intrigued, and that's how I started my work. And I think knowing a little about Betsuki will help you understand my piece. So I'll tell you a little bit. And about 200 years ago, when killings were not uncommon, they risked their lives to guard the wives and daughters of their overlords. They usually came from a lower class and served the rulers to feed their families back home, or to help their fathers and brothers receive better treatment from the overlords. Betsuki's eyebrows were shaved off. The custom was instilled to make them appear unattractive to courtship, especially with the overlord's precious sons. A Japanese writer who witnessed them accompanying their female charges wrote, "The faces of Betsuki were calm but resolute." I went after for that expression in this bust, undaunted and proud, despite the circumstances they were in. So this is what I wrote about this piece.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that calm but resilient face really shows through. And I think that's what I've heard a lot of people comment about this piece specifically, is her facial expression is so resolute but calm. And it's absolutely beautiful. So tell me about what you believe women's work is to you, and what inspired you to apply to this show.
This is my first year doing group shows. I'm sorry, I tried everything at the beginning of this year. And I went to a women's show in South Dakota, in Brookings, South Dakota. And it's wonderful to see just women's work and representing our history. And I wanted to be part of it. And, in South Dakota, I could not be part. So, I happened to see it in cafe, and I wanted to give it a try.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for applying and getting in, and your work is just so beautiful, and you can see it here in the room. It's just, with everything around it, it's just really gorgeous. And then anything else you wanted to add, Tenyo, before we move on?
No, I think that's enough. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really feel honored to be included. So.
Well, thank you, Tenyo.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on into the next room, we'll have Diana Tremaine is up next. Diana is our Purchase Award winner. So congratulations, Diana, for that. So tell me, Diana, about this beautiful piece here.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Okay,
great. Well, that happens to be my daughter and her friends, and it's based on an afternoon we all spent together several years ago. And I have painted my daughter many, 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 many times throughout her life. Never so much really motivated by wanting to make a beautiful portrait of my daughter. I'm not going after sentimentality. More, I was and remain, maybe less so in the teenage years, but when they were younger, really awestruck by these young girls' lack of self-consciousness and the way they move through the world, just really with conviction and love and joy. And for me personally, I found that to be a huge teaching and something that we lose when we're older. So I've always wanted to really present their actions in a way that would be informative for how we should live as adults, because I feel like we lose some of that. I've always been moved in my work to paint my passion and to show the world what I think is working and needs to be saved and honored, as opposed to doing political work or pointing out, talking about, creating a dialogue about some things that aren't working as well. So honestly, I don't know a greater teacher than my daughter and her friends. And that's why I've been moved to paint them, because I think we need to look at how phenomenally successfully they move through the world without judgment, without judging themselves, without judging others, loving holding each other's hands, loving being in piles. They were always together, so not fearing intimacy, not fearing a tactile, free way of being together. I find it inspirational to me. And that's why I painted the painting, because to see them together is awe-inspiring to me. And so it's sort of my hope for how we can move forward in the future, and my vision of what I want for the world in the future, what I don't want to lose, really.
Right. And did the large scale of the painting also just kind of contribute to that monumentality that you wanted to convey?
It definitely did. I love working large. I'm very comfortable working large. And I took multiple photos of the girls, and I changed their positions to create the composition that I wanted. And I wanted to have the negative spaces be as interesting as the positive space. And I find that difficult to do on a small scale. So as much as the subject is important, I'm also always motivated by technical aspects of painting and composition, and trying to create a bit of a tension between the flat space and the sculpted space, and leave some room, some openness, some room for the viewer to come into the painting. But yeah, the large scale, I love that. I love large scale. I'm very comfortable working that way.
Yeah. So talk to me about the theme of women's work and what that means to you, and sort of what inspired you to apply to the show.
Well, I think, like we've heard from all these amazing artists, women's work is obviously all encompassing. It's everything. In my personal experience as a mother, I don't think there's anything more important for me, because I'm a mother, than how I steer my daughter into the future. They are our future. And certainly dads obviously play a role in that too, but women are often still the primary caretaker. And I just think I find that work critical, and that it does take a village, and it's regardless of whatever else I do in my life, that's the most important work I'll ever do. And to try to undo wrongs that might have been done to me, don't pass them on, create a good person, create a holistic person who wants to be engaged in the community and who can bring good to the world. I guess for me personally, I can't think of anything more important, because I'm a mother. So it was sort of when I saw the call for women's work, and I had this painting actually in my mind and in my heart for years. I just decided, okay, now's the time, do the painting. So that's what I did.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Diana. And again, congratulations on the Purchase Award. We're so excited to have this work in the collection. So exciting.
I'm really honored to have been showed with these amazing artists. Their work is incredible, and their varied concepts and approaches, and the authenticity that I hear in all of them is so inspiring and so moving. And I love the diversity of what in fact is women's work.
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful, and I'm really honored. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. All righty. So next we have Veronica Chechi. Hello.
Hello.
So we'll just zoom on over here to your piece here. So tell us about your work, Veronica.
This piece is called Working Hard or Hardly Working, which is that classic dad joke that people tell when you tell them how your day is going. And it's creating a narrative of contrast between people who are moving through a transitional space. It could be an airport, it could be a train station, but there's no couches, there's no chairs, it's not a house, they're moving through it. Maybe they're working, maybe they're not. They could just be standing around, these male figures that are kind of like one with the background. And they're in contrast to a feminine figure, which is very clearly working, which is doing something that, is recognized across cultures as work, mopping a floor. And it's sort of that dialogue between what is seen and unseen, and who is actually working in any given situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know reading your statement, you were inspired by your experience working as a housekeeper, and how did that sort of inform this work?
Well, I was working as a housekeeper simultaneous to having another job. I worked for 16 years as a collaborative master printer. So I used my technical skills to make work for other artists. And that work is in collections like the Smithsonian. But even though I was part of making that work, my name is not in the Smithsonian, right? So I was existing in this very high class space where I was an unrecognized laborer. And furthermore, that space was contract work, so it was not enough to support me because I never knew if I was going to have a contract or the space between the contracts. So I actually had an additional job working as a housekeeper at a day spa where they would do massages and facials and that kind of thing. And that was my steady job. And that job had benefits and regular hours, and I had predictable income from it, but there I was also invisible. So I was in a high class situation and what might be perceived as a low class situation. Acting as a servant in both places, and not being recognized for what I was doing. And I started to build up like a little resentment at each of those positions, and seeing the kind of things that were very much in common about them. You know, the repetition of printmaking, tearing paper reminded me of folding towels at the spa. You know, you have a stack of paper and you got to tear all the paper. You have a stack of towels and you have to fold all the towels. And this is a very early piece in this body of work that I've been doing. And so it started out more just me exploring like the resentments I was feeling at being invisible, even though I was using like, you know, technical skills that took me literally decades to build, and also the corollaries between the two different types of work I was doing and how they were both basically just variations on what is typically feminized labor.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I love about this piece specifically is the color. And so what, you know, that contrast of the red of the working woman and then the rest of the world, that masculine world, in that kind of light purple. How did the color factor in there?
Well, part of my goal with the series of works that I'm doing is to make the person that we usually don't see the brightest person or the most reflective figure on the landscape. I don't know if it's possible to zoom in at all. She's got kind of a hot pink outline, and there's actually a skeletal structure inside of her. It's sort of a black on black thing. I'm always making work that looks better in person than it does digitally, because I do like little tricks with the ink. Mm-hmm. So she's actually outlined in a neon ink and printed on a separate piece of paper and then glued onto that background. So not only is she a brighter color, but she also exists physically separate from the other figures. It's a different technique of printmaking, and it's applied onto the other prints.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and this piece is fantastic. Like she said, it's so much better in person. The picture really does not do it justice, and I apologize. But yes, this piece is amazing. And we talked about scale with Diana too. Was the large scale important to you when working on this?
As someone who makes, or past tense, I'm not working that way right now, made art for other artists, when I was printing my own work, I always sought to do something that other people couldn't afford to pay me to do for them. And part of my fees had to do with the scale of what I was doing and how many layers of printing there were. So in my own work, I always tried to do things bigger and more complicated to say, this is for me. I saved the best of it for me. Y'all can't actually afford to have this level of Veronica. So this is an 11 color woodcut with a 3 color Shinkale on top of it.
Wow. Well, we are so thrilled to have your work in the show, Veronica. It's just fantastic. So tell me about what women's work means to you, and what sort of inspired you to apply to the show.
As I said earlier, this is a kind of an early piece in a series that I'm about 4 years into right now, which is called Keeping House, which explores really specifically women's work. And I also have pieces from the series in shows at the Contemporary Art Center New Orleans and the Shaker Museum in Lebanon right now. So I'm really been very lucky this year to be getting a little bit of recognition for this work. And it's about taking that idea of cleaning and equating it with social change. And, you know, social change is something that happens in these little bursts, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you have to keep working at it. And cleaning is like that too. It's temporary. It makes things better, but then people come stomping through again and you have to mop the floor again. It's never permanent. And it's a way of moving incrementally towards an idealized space that you may never actually get to.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Veronica. We're thrilled to have you in the show. Is there anything else you want to add before we move on?
No, I think that covers it. I'm just so pleased to be a part of it. And I would also like to say I really appreciate how the museum pivoted, you know, like there was one conception of the show and then the world changed, and that's a lot on y'all's plate. And I think you did a really admirable job of communicating with everyone and still making things happen the best way that you know how.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Veronica. All right, moving on into the hallway here, we've got the lovely Stephanie Frostad. Hello, Stephanie.
Good evening, everyone.
So tell me about this beautiful piece here entitled Mender.
Yes, well, the truth is, I would say the topic subject of like at least 50% of my work is women's work. But I've approached that largely through figurative narrative painting, where I'm creating perspectival space, or at least illusory space to hold the figure in their acts. And alongside that work for years and years, I've also enjoyed creating studies, mostly of flora and fauna, in more ambiguous space, not elaborating on the context in which I experience them. And I feel in some ways the hands-on series, which all works on the same format, 14 by 11 inches. Well, actually there were a couple on a different format, but still life-size hands with tools, basically, you know, up to the elbow. And there's a kind of formal synthesis between what I've done with those studies over the years and what I do with more naturalistic portrayal in figurative narrative work. And I submitted to the show. There are, I think, 25 of these paintings so far, a selection. And I was actually a little surprised that the juror chose what I would say is one of the most conventionally feminine tools that women hold, and that is the needle and thread. However, it sort of weaves into so much of the work that involves textiles in the show that I kind of feel like she's there to represent the embroiderers, even the anonymous embroiderers that we see in Maggie's work, for example. I guess the other thing I might, well, I guess a couple things. Almost all my models have been women artists. So even though it isn't a portrait in a conventional sense, and most people won't know who they are, for me, working on these paintings in process, I feel like I'm communing with and honoring people I admire in the community. And this person actually happens to be Leslie Van Staven-Millar's daughter, Indigo, who is a fashion designer and works with clothes. She teaches and works with clothing in many different ways. So this is actually one of her tools. She's not, say, holding a sickle or a scythe or some of these other instruments that the models have had. And so that's sort of the story of this particular piece.
And I know we don't have them in front of us, but I know the other works in this series are very much more kind of monochromatic with the colors. What was sort of the inspiration for the color behind this piece as opposed to something more bright that I know you've done before?
Well, yeah, so this is part of a series of 6 I generated over the winter, autumn or winter. And I think I was just really looking for ways to allow the drawing to stand. And when the paint gets more opulent, more vibrant, more high contrast, the drawing sort of disappears into it or gets drowned out. So that whole series has a fairly subtle palette. I don't feel committed to that overall, but I do just personally love the way these finer washes and earthier or close to neutral colors blend with the graphite that I use initially.
Yes. Well, I have to say this piece is one of my favorites. The hand is just, people walk by and they comment on that hand, just the working hand. It's just, it's so beautiful, and contrast that with the more kind of abstract skirt. Just well done, Stephanie. You're very talented. Good job. I mean, I think we already kind of touched on this about the concept of women's work and how it relates to you as an artist. But is there anything else you want to add about that?
Oh, well, you know, I was just delighted to hear about the show and curious if there were ways it would contest what we think of as women's work, expand that notion. And so I was just really delighted to have a chance to submit something to it, and also very curious to see what the overall kind of spectrum of representations might be to the show. So it's an exciting event for me. It feels in keeping with what I do rather routinely in terms of my explorations. But yeah, I just really enjoying, especially hearing more about some of these pieces with the artist on hand this evening.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for participating. It was great to hear from you, and thank you for submitting this beautiful piece to the show.
Thank you. And I just want to echo Veronica and say I think that you all really have done a remarkable job of keeping the show kind of vital and accessible given the unforeseen circumstances that the pandemic presented.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I think the next one, we've got Blair Truer, and I think talking about unconventional portraits is a great way to transition into Blair's work. So hello, Blair.
Hi.
So not many people, I think, may know this initially by looking at it, but your works are actually portraits, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
oh no, I was gonna say, go on.
So this piece is actually part of a portrait series that I did about my family and identity. So my husband and I have 9 children, and my husband and my children are all Native American, and I am not. And so this whole portrait series that I did, you know, a portrait of myself, my husband, and each of our 9 children. And I explore identity and what it's been like for me as an outsider in Native culture looking in. It's kind of hard to see what's happening here on this portrait, but this is a portrait of my oldest daughter, and what is in front of her face are goldfinches. And in Native culture, well, in Ojibwe culture, the goldfinch represents the Ojibwe language, but in this portrait series, I've decided to have that represent the whole breadth and depth and beauty of Ojibwe traditional culture and spiritual ways. And everything that I've learned about traditional culture, like their food, clothing that they wear, how we harvest food, all of that, the language, all of that informs Ojibwe people about who they are, where they come from, their connection to the earth and to each other. And so those goldfinches, in my mind, represent like the cultural toolbox that they've been given as a birthright. So in order to not get too distracted, I would like to read what this piece in particular means to me. Okay, so Jordan is my oldest child. She has struggled with drug addiction for a decade. She has been in and out of treatment, in and out of jail, and has lost her children, who are featured in the portrait of my son Robert, who dropped out of college to raise them when they were removed from my daughter's care. This portrait is a prayer that those cultural and spiritual ways of being may overcome her vision by blocking her access to the destructive influences she has become fixated on. The cultural toolbox, as I like to call it, is a birthright, but it was also gifted to her. And it feels as though she has neglected to open the box for some time now. The wire mesh that I mounted my pieces on are visible in parts of this portrait, representing the cage, both literally and figuratively, that she keeps not only her heritage in, but the cage her body and spirit are in as well, having been placed behind bars several times. I encourage all of you to be prayerful as you interact with those particular pieces. As uncomfortable as it is for me to publicly share her private struggles, I know that she can't do this all alone. I believe that the more we see each other, actually see each other, the more love and support we can generate from each other. I also believe in the power of prayerful thoughts, and it is my hope that by sharing this, she will have the full weight and breadth of this community rallying behind her, because prayers are incredibly powerful.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, Blair. That was very powerful, and I really appreciate you putting that out there. Like you said, that's a very private thing to put out there into the world, but I think this piece is so powerful, and even before people know the story behind it, I think they're drawn to it, you know, for just its power and the materials you use. Talk to me about, you know, how that got started, because this is sort of an unconventional way, you know, to create visual art.
So I was actually super nervous to submit anywhere because I'm self-taught, and so I'm still convinced that I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know if anybody else will appreciate it. But I got started with fabric because my children participated in a traditional Native American ceremony, and in order for them to participate, I had to make blankets as part of their offering. So I had to learn to sew in order to build these bundles for their ceremony. And then once all of my children went through that ceremony, it's a healing ceremony, I fell in love with fabric. And I couldn't let it go. So, you know, most people do, you know, traditional squares for their offerings. But being a creative person, I tried to pictorially depict each of their Native American names that they were given. So I, you know, transitioned through and had a huge learning curve for how to sew and how to try to create an image with fabric. And so I have an unusual process. I don't call myself a quilter at all. I have high praise for people who are quilters, and I know that they really you know, they have to master lots of sewing techniques, and I that's not what I do. I have a lot to learn as far as being a sewer. But I don't know, I just love the freedom that I have with fabric. And I mounted it to wire, which meant that I also have the freedom to create pieces that are irregularly shaped and can go wherever I feel like they need to. And they're almost like sculptural on the wall, which has been really, really exciting for me too.
Yeah. Well, so what is the theme of women's work kind of mean to you, and sort of tell us about your process for applying for the show?
Well, I kind of had dual reasons for applying. When I saw women's work, immediately what came to mind was, you know, I had been walking my aunt through my solo show of all of these pieces, and she just turned to me and her eyes were tearful, and she's like, she's one of the strongest women I know and advocates for us like hardcore, right? And so she was like, this feels like women's work. The fabric and it being about your children and your family and your struggle, like this feel like I can feel female presence in the gallery when I'm standing here looking at all of these. And then the second piece that really made me want to apply was, I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier, that like 2020 is the year of the women, right? And it is a little disappointing that this is our year, but in a way it's not, because I feel like it is women's work to insist on compassion, to insist on it, to show how to do it, to make sure it's part of the conversation, to make sure it's at the forefront of conversation, and to steer us all in that direction. And looking at so many pieces in this show, I see that as an overarching theme for sure, that we're all connected around and rallying around, and really trying to make sure it doesn't get lost in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Blair. We really appreciate your participation in the show. And again, thank you for being so forthcoming with talking about your art. We really appreciate it.
I just appreciate the opportunity so much. I can't even tell you guys how grateful I am to have been a part of the show, especially seeing everything else that everybody is creating. And, you know, I'm so new. The first time anybody, even in my community, my small community, knew that I did anything like this was January of this year. So I'm new and terrified, and everybody was so welcoming. And this experience has just been like so overwhelming and beautiful. And I'm just overflowing with gratitude. So thank you.
Well, I think you've got a whole new community of supporters now, Blair. So, all right. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Julie with her beautiful piece, Tall Grass Sampler Series, Bison Dawn Dream Circle. Hi, Julie.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So nice to be here. And wow, what powerful narratives people have been sharing this evening, and very
I know, right? So tell us about your piece.
Well, this piece, I've been working sort of in different scales. Some of my work stands back and examines larger Western spaces. In my work, I guess I think of myself as, in a way, a landscape artist, but interior landscapes. And a few years ago, I was fortunate to receive a residency to be in the Tallgrass National Preserve in Kansas. And I had had an experience the year before of driving through that region, and was really, like, literally blown away by the breadth of the space. And of course, I am, in a sense, Western artist. I live in Santa Fe, but the space of that prairie was, it moved me so that I wanted to learn more about it. And began research, and I had gotten this residency, and I was saying how to describe the space. And I think, like many of us that are speaking today, our work is kind of legacy work too. I, like many of you, probably have, you know, grandmothers that did women's work as seamstresses or activities. And one of in my research, some of the narratives that I was, I guess, deeply touched by, you could say, is in the 19th century, women who may not have had choices in terms of their creative life and embracing their creative power again. And in some of these Western spaces, certainly where I reside now, there's a great history of women coming at the turn of the century to find freedom to express themselves. But also, sometimes those landscapes crushed women too. And there was madness. And so I was looking at, in my work too, researching about, you know, creativity found and creativity lost, and the activity of, you know, the repetitive work that many women engaged in. And so this piece is is a polymer plate of a woman's journal from the 19th century and her end page. And, you know, that was training to run a little household, right? And tend to household duties. I have that letter in my work a lot, and because of reading about where is North and how do you find direction in these vast spaces. That was really interesting to me. Where does it come from? And so I was looking, like, could I find a woman's a cursive journal? And the actual embroidered work is, for me, it's a rendering of an experience I had when I was in Kansas, walking in the prairie, and in the morning saw the impressions of bison circles from where they slept at night. And I thought about what must it have been like for women who may have come to the West and experienced this intense landscape, a live landscape, and then finding their space, finding a way to be creative. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell, but that's, you know, and my work kind of moves from looking in and then, you know, trying to give expression to the vastness, the horizon, you know, that pulls us, and the dignity to give dignity to that work, and the legacy that, you know, many of us have of women before us, passing their creativity forward. So that.
Wow, that's great, and I think that's a wonderful sort of ending to all of these, to talk about the legacy and the stories and all of that. So, and you've kind of touched on it already, but the concept of women's work, what that means to you, and sort of what your process was at applying for this show.
Yes, yeah. I, as many of us have talked about, you know, I think as women artists, the ability to participate in a woman's a show that highlights, where as the juror for this show, Jill Alberg-Yohe, who spoke so eloquently, I really enjoyed her presentations, and the discussion of our work. Sometimes, you know, it gets relegated to craft. It gets as if that is, you know, because it, and we all know this, it's so integral, you know, as Blair was just speaking to, and certainly to be able to show also in the West, where we did get the voting rights earlier out here, and the strong matriarchal native cultures that exist in this region. Yeah, it's very special to be able to participate in lifting women's work, for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Julie, and thank you so much, everybody. This was really powerful. I think maybe more powerful than all of us thought it was going to be. I think this was really empowering. I'm like, man, I wish y'all were here. We could just all hug each other. But I want to thank everyone for their participation in the show. This was such an amazing show. And I think it's going to be really hard to top it for next year's North by Northwest theme, which we're not quite sure what it is yet, but we'll let y'all know. But I just want to thank y'all, and thank you for being so flexible with everything changing with the COVID. And but I think opportunities like this come about because of COVID, and I don't think this is something we would have ever done otherwise. And so I think it's pretty exciting for that reason. But so thank you, everyone. Does anyone have anything else they want to add before we log off and say goodnight? No?
Thank you all. I really, truly feel more stirred than I ever anticipated sitting down to do this with you this evening. And so I'm grateful for your candor and all you revealed about your process and experience. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And the show is closing on Sunday. Sunday's the last day to see it. So if you haven't seen it, come in. Not long now. You've just got the weekend. But yeah, thanks, everyone. And we'll all see you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.